Well, a quiet country road in Quebec has become a busy, illegal, and desperate exit from the U.S. Today, the province's immigration minister said the daily number of asylum seekers at the border has tripled in the last 2 weeks. Most of them are Haitian. Both Quebec and the federal government say border officials are equipped to handle the influx, but Ottawa will still increase staff and resources to help process the claims. Is that enough? What would the opposition do? Joining me now from Montreal is Quebec Liberal MP Marc Miller. From Vienna via Skype is Conservative immigration critic Michel Rempel. And with me here in the studio is NDP immigration critic Jenny Kwan. Thanks to you all for joining us. Marc Miller, can I start with you and ask you what the government is doing, I mean immediately, to cope with this surge in asylum seekers at the Quebec border?
Thank you, Terry. Clearly, there's been an increase in the flow of crossings, and certainly in an irregular fashion, particularly at the Lacole and surrounding areas. We're concerned by it, and we're working tightly with the Quebec government to ensure that resources are put into place to do a proper triage. Obviously, security and safety of Canadian citizens is foremost. So at the border, we're doing a triage for criminal background and health checks. And then if the people so choose, they make an asylum claim, and that's processed in due course.
This all sounds good. This sounds good, but I'm asking a more specific question. I mean, we've had reporters at the border the last couple of days. They're reporting on people sleeping on the ground, not enough food. I mean, what are you doing now to deal with the immediate problems?
So we're reallocating resources to the border. Obviously, the people working at the border crossings, whether it's the border officers or the RCMP that is intercepting people that are crossing irregularly, are working around the clock in some instances, and we've moved decisively to give more resources into particularly the Lacole area to do the triage in a more effective fashion and to take the load off these people that are really working hard to make sure that the people that are taking life into their hands, frankly, for their safety and that of their family, and are looking to Canada to act and protect them, to respond. And so that's what we're doing. We do an initial triage, and then if these people make an asylum claim, they are then transported for shelter, food and water, and proper processing of the claim.
Michel Rempel in Vienna, what would you like to see the government do to
We've been raising this issue since early last year. The fact is the government has not addressed the issue of illegal border crossing in any way, shape or form. So what would I like to see happen? First of all, the government's lack of planning in this area has seen an 11-year wait time for the processing of asylum claims. So what my colleague said when he says these are processed in due course, he means 11 years. That's not acceptable because that puts undue strain on provincial health care and social services programs. So the government must immediately put more resources and more judges in place to reduce that backlog. The second thing that the government needs to do is acknowledge the fact that by saying Canada is open and welcome to refugees and refuses to close the loophole on the Safe Third Country Agreement, that they have encouraged this type of irregular migration into the country. The government needs to say that there are safe and regular ways to come into the country and to close that loophole. The other thing that the government needs to do is enter into a very quick and swift discussion with affected provinces such as Quebec and Manitoba and talk about, as you mentioned, Terry, the immediate resourcing needs of these small towns where it is not only unsafe for the people in the communities that are affected, but the people that are crossing the border. This problem is not going to get better. It's not going to have any change by the government saying we're monitoring the situation or things are happening in due course. The government needs a plan. They need strong action. And frankly, we haven't seen that. All we've seen is the Prime Minister show off his socks.
All right, we're fortunate that one of our number has actually been to the border quite recently, not in Quebec, but in Emerson, Manitoba. Is that correct?
Indeed.
Yeah,
that's correct.
So Jenny Kwan, tell us what you saw there and how that bears upon this discussion.
Well, I just went to Emerson several weeks ago, and I spoke with the town council members, with the local business people, the emergency preparedness center individuals, and, you know, they are feeling a little bit abandoned from this federal government. The truth of the matter is they've been left to really basically fend for themselves to deal with the situation. And, you know, I got to hand it to them. They're doing their level best. And the reality is this: asylum seekers are continuing to come in Manitoba, in British Columbia, and now in Quebec. The number has spiked so significantly. Just by way of comparison, This year in July, that number is at 1,200. Last year, by comparison, is less than 200. So really, for the government to sort of say, well, nothing has changed since the Trump administration, they're absolutely choosing willingly to ignore the real reality of what's going on. And they need to step up and come up with a real solution and put order back into the situation. And what people want is for the government to ensure that asylum seekers are doing this safely, in an orderly fashion, and border communities also deserve that as well. And the government can, in fact, do that. And what they need to do is suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement.
Mark Miller, they're not buying it, that everything's tickety-boo, that everything's going as it should. How do you respond?
Well, look, clearly the 11-year wait time is erroneous. Each case varies in its complexity, and we deal with it.
That was reported in the Canadian press, Mark. So are you saying the Canadian press is
with due
wrong?
respect, can I just clarify? That's a projection of where we might end up in the year 2020 or 21 or something like that. It's a guesstimate at the very best.
Maybe I can.
But Mark Miller, continue, please.
So maybe if I may continue, clearly that number is erroneous. Processing times have increased.
So what is it?
Processing times have.
It's not 3 months. It's not immediate.
And we're moving to reform the IRB, but that's an independent process. They're composed of very qualified individuals. We've placed 60 posts in an open and transparent process. And we're doing an independent review of the agency. Again, it follows the rule of law. It's a tribunal. It needs to take decisions on a case-by-case basis. People that are entitled to be here are welcome here. Canada is open and transparent. Canadians expect that from us. And they want more people contributing to this.
Mr. Miller, could you also respond to the question?
That's just a bunch of talking points. That's ridiculous.
Forgive me.
This has to be done right now.
It
can't be done in a consultation to consult process, Mark.
I'd like to, if I may, Michelle, are you hearing me? Michelle, there's another question on the table that I'd like to deal with first, if that's okay with you, and that is I'd like Mr. Miller to respond to the points that both of his antagonists here have made about the Safe Third Country Agreement. What do you say about that, Mr. Miller?
They're not antagonists. They're colleagues, and they're entitled to ask me difficult questions. That's not a problem. The Safe Third Party Agreement is an agreement with the U.S. that has a regularized fashion of dealing with refugee cases. It's been an efficient tool over the years, and it would be foolish and indeed careless to take unilateral moves with respect to it. Yes, people are crossing Canada in a regular fashion. We discourage it, and it is not an automatic pathway to citizenship or a pathway to a successful applicationship. The rule of law applies. The cases must be submitted and applied for and reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Those that are entitled to be here can stay. But the Safe Third Country Agreement is an agreement that can't be discussed without talking about the wonderful border relationship we have with our American partners, which is a border that is crossed regularly on a daily basis by 400,000 people in a regular fashion. We have a great working relationship, and we continually reevaluate and reassess the tools we need to keep our border safe and protected.
All right, Michelle Rempel, can I put another question to you, and that is that you've got to deal with the fact that the Quebec immigration minister, who, let's face it, is on the front line, this is where the bulk of the influx is happening right now, he says they can handle this. And the mayor of the border town where the refugees are said things are fine, it's going as well as it can. Aren't you making much ado about nothing?
I would look to the broader Canadian public that the government is saying it has social license from to continue to bring high levels of refugees into our country. What the Liberals have just said on this interview is that they have no plan to deal with this situation. The reality is that when you look at the number of people who have come into Manitoba and Quebec, this is placing a strain on not only border resources, but the healthcare system, social assistance programs, as well as affordable housing. And, when you look at that 11-year wait time, that means that Canadian taxpayers are having to deal with a situation where they want to be compassionate, but the government doesn't have a plan to process these claims efficiently, and they don't have a plan to integrate asylum seekers into the broader Canadian economy.
Let me cut in on you, because
that's where the rubber hits the road, and that's where the government needs to have a plan. I think most
we
people
have your point.
listening to your show
I want to make sure
would take
that we don't run out of time.
Much ado about nothing.
I want to make sure we don't run out of time before Jenny Kwan has a chance to respond. You mentioned the Safe Third Country Agreement. Obviously, that has the risk, does it not, of increasing the numbers because people can arrive safely at a legal border and they don't have to take the risk of arriving illegally.
Well, the numbers are increasing already, and that's the reality, and it's chaotic. And border towns are not ready to receive the influx and the increase that's happening right now. That's why we have the situation that we have in Quebec, where people are being housed in a stadium. That's what's happening. Does that speak to you, Canada welcomes you? Does that reflect what the Prime Minister is suggesting to the international stage, that this is how we receive asylum seekers? Of course not. Canadians expect better, and we can do better. How do we do that? In fact, the agreement, if MP Miller actually read the agreement, he will know that Article 10 in the agreement actually says that Canada can immediately suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement for 90 days. And then you can actually put in an orderly process to deal with the situation, not just for Quebec, not just in Winnipeg, but also actually in British Columbia, where we have a local agency now at wit's end because they cannot help process and support the asylum seekers. They're bringing people to their own living room, and the government is ignoring the situation, and it's not good enough.
We have run out of time, but thanks to you all, to Mark Miller, Michelle Rempel, and Jenny Kwan here in the studio with me. Thanks to you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Terry.
Cheers.